I believe that if you can find a certain set of principles to live your life by, you'll be able to apply those principles in lots of different situations and you'll get the same outcomes. If you're getting different outcomes, then you need to probably change those principles. And this is why, as someone who is a free thinker, I view things in a consistent way. I can always call balls and strikes. And this principle, the Cobra effect, is one of those things that when you understand it, you can apply it to so many different things, especially what's going on in government and politics right now. So check this out and absorb this because it's got a lot of good stuff in it.
The Cobra Effect. Why good intentions don't solve problems. This article was prompted by an exchange I had with Elon Musk on X, in which he pointed out that giving more money to homelessness charities in California does not seem to reduce the number of homeless people. In response, I reminded him about the Cobra Effect and was surprised to discover how many people hadn't heard of it.
So we have these discussions quite often about what's going on in politics, what's going on in Washington, D.C., and we always talk about corruption. And I like to be fair, and I also like to think about things in terms of human nature. If you can apply human nature to most things, you'll understand why those things happen. And it doesn't always come down to people just being evil, it just comes down to human nature. Listen to this and apply this and think about this in the context of everything that's happening with the Trump administration, all of the different things around DEI, and a lot of the government waste.
The Cobra Effect is based on a story which may or may not have taken place during British colonial rule in India. Despite its unconfirmed authenticity, it remains a powerful illustration of how bad incentives can undermine good intentions. In my view, it should be taught as early as possible to anyone who intends to run, manage, or operate any system of almost any complexity. The story goes something like this. In colonial India under British rule, the city of Delhi had a problem with cobras. To control the cobra population, the government offered a bounty for every dead cobra. Huge numbers of dead cobras were handed in, but the cobra problem got worse, not better. Why? Because people realized they could profit from this bounty not by...
So there's two things in there. The initial thing is the government's trying to do something. So the government is intervening in a situation in society. You could say that they had a good intention. They wanted something done. They wanted to get rid of the cobras. But then the second part of it, so the second order thinking, is the fact that people realize that they can make money. And that's the wickedness of man's heart. That's human nature. That's just greed. This is why socialism does not work. This is why communism does not work, because human beings are wired in a way to do certain things. And so in this story and in the Cobra effect, it's saying that, people want good things. So you have these well-intentioned people, but these people are naive because they're not taking into account human nature.
By killing cobras in the wild, but by breeding cobras, raising and killing them specifically for reward. This led to small-scale cobra farming operations. When the government became aware of this practice, they discontinued the bounty program. Without the incentive, the cobra breeders released their now worthless snakes into the wild. As a result, the cobra population in Delhi ended up increasing rather than decreasing, exacerbated by the government's own policies. The reason this story resonates is that it reflects something we all know. Intentions don't drive human behavior, incentives do. A good recent example might be Mexico City's Hoy No Circular program, intended to reduce pollution by banning cars from the road one day a week based on their license plate numbers. This policy led to an increase in car ownership. Why? Because people bought additional cars with different plate numbers to bypass the restriction.
And this is why socialism doesn't work, communism doesn't work, because the people putting these systems in place forget the lessons of history, the lessons of socialism and communism in the past. Every single time it has not worked, they'll say it just wasn't implemented properly, but no matter how it's implemented, it will always have the same outcomes.
Thus increasing pollution. You will no doubt be aware that over the last decade there's been a powerful societal push to improve relations between different racial, ethnic and other groups. Yet oddly, tensions between these various groups do not appear to be declining. On the contrary, men and women, for example, are increasingly positioned as enemies by man-hating feminists on the one hand and misogynistic incels and people like Andrew Tate on the other. The same is true of race relations, where our societies have moved in a matter of years from an imperfect color blindness to an obsession with skin color and ethnic background. How has this happened? Well, once the well-intentioned goal of eliminating discrimination became lucrative through the introduction of anti-racism courses, media advocacy, and the diversity industrial complex, the demand for racism began to outstrip supply.
Exactly. And I'm old enough to remember when I was growing up, it felt like, we realized that we were black. We realized that some of our friends were white or Indian or whatever. We'd make fun of each other, but it was never something nefarious. It was never a hate. It was getting to know each other and we got along. You had TV shows like The Jeffersons and All in the Family, where these racial differences were viewed as something to be talked about. But then we moved into this strange place where you're not supposed to talk about it. And the things that were bringing us together were eliminated. So the fact that we could all go out, hang out, tell a joke, say what we wanted to say, those things were eliminated. So people stopped talking. People stopped spending time with people that weren't like them. And we actually became more segregated because there was a need for an environment where people could say, oh, I'm afraid of this person, or I don't get along with that person, or that person is thinking a thing, or they looked at me funny and therefore they're racist. I remember a time when we used to say that they were bigots, people were prejudiced. The term racist is a fairly new thing, and it's now used to describe absolutely any behavior that we don't understand.
In a world in which you could earn tens of thousands of dollars for teaching white people to feel guilty, pursue a profitable career based entirely on media appearances, and raise millions through activism, the incentives became irresistible. As Eric Hoffer famously said, every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. If you are an anti-racist charity, for example, the gradual elimination of racism, your stated goal, is a direct threat to your existence.
Boom. Right? I've said this for years and years and years and years. You set up a organization or you set up a movement in order to prevent racism. Obviously, you don't want racism to be eliminated because then you're out of business. This is where the Crumps and the race hustlers, all of these people that make money off talking about racism, they don't want it to end. And because it's not in existence the way that it was previously, and it doesn't manifest itself the way that it did previously, they actually have to make it up. So people like Al Sharpton, his whole organization is based on there being this white supremacist regime when there actually isn't. But he has to say that it exists in order to make himself relevant and in order to make the big bucks that he brings in.
This is why you must find more and more evidence of the thing you're attempting to eradicate, which is where concepts like microaggressions come from. In the absence of clear evidence of racism, new forms of racism must be found. That's why it is wise to pay very little attention to the intentions people declare when attempting to persuade others to their cause, and a great deal of attention to how carefully they've considered the incentive structure, as well as the second-order consequences of their actions. That's the consequences of the consequences. This brings us back to homelessness in California. Not only are attempts to deal with it failing, but the problem itself is also the result of well-intentioned policies. The deinstitutionalization movement, whose goal was to free people of the tyranny of mental asylums in America, sought to capitalize on the invention of new medications like Thorazine, which made it feasible for mentally ill people to live in the community. In doing so, advocates pushed for a transition away from mental institutions whose horrors are well documented.
Now, I want to believe that people had good intentions, but again, good intentions do not necessarily mean that there are going to be good outcomes. And we know this. So they keep doing the exact same thing, causing problems, and then they always blame the people that were opposing it in the first place by saying, well, they didn't allow us to actually implement it in the best way. That's why it didn't work out.
Unfortunately, they fail to take into account that when you release people with significant emotional, psychological, and mental challenges into the community, they frequently fall through the cracks. especially in a society which is rapidly losing the familial bonds and social cohesion it once enjoyed. As a result, the streets of major cities in California are littered with tents, encampments, and zombie-resembling drug addicts, as people unable to cope without help end up homeless. All of these stories poignantly illustrate the power that a narrative of good intentions holds over the human psyche. The ultimate example of a failed narrative based on this approach is, of course, communism. As Thomas Sowell once wrote in Is Reality Optional?, much of the social history of the Western world over the last 3 decades has been a history of replacing what worked with what sounded good. The more we continue to do this, the bigger our failures will be. If you enjoy these videos, you should know that they're available on my Substack weeks, sometimes months ahead of time. Click the link in the description, head on over there now, and subscribe.
Make sure you check out those videos. There's great content. They're very thoughtful. It's critical thinking. I wanted to bring this one out because I talk a lot about politics, and I do like to be fair and I do like to be balanced. And I think that people quite often think they're doing the right thing and they think that they have good intentions. However, their good intentions don't always get the outcomes that they want. And when we're trying to tell them that this thing will not work out, free grocery stores in New York will not work out, free buses in New York will not work out, rent control will not work out, we're viewed as racist, sexist, homophobic, the trifecta of everything that they accuse you of when they don't want you to be heard, when they want to shut you down. But we know these things won't work. And the Cobra Effect is one of the best ways of explaining it. I hope it's something that you can now add to your toolbox as far as principles that you can apply in your life that will help make you a little bit more gracious with people and show a little bit more patience, because their intentions are often good, or at least in their eyes they're good. It's just the outcomes that don't work out the way that they want them to work out. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and make sure you share these videos with anyone that you feel it would benefit. Make sure you leave comments, because this is a really small channel and every comment is useful, even the bad ones. As I always say, I'm just a guy with a Wi-Fi connection and a camera. I don't have it all